Hello, and welcome to this episode of Central Valley Stories, Advertising and Public Relations. On this podcast, we talk history, trends, changes, and challenges with some of the region's veteran practitioners and agency owners. I'm your host, Professor Betsy Hayes, in the Media, Communications, and Journalism Department at Fresno State. Enjoy! Today, we are fortunate to have Liz Hudson in the studio, and we're going to be talking about her fabulous career, especially in these spaces of agricultural and water communications, particularly in the Central Valley. Obviously, very, very important things and industries, and we're looking forward to hearing from Liz and also getting her words of wisdom. So first of all, Liz, welcome.
Thank you, Betsy. It's nice to be here, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this.
So let's provide a little bit of context for our listeners. Can you tell us about your career path? Walk us through.
Well, I was one of those farm kids that really wasn't a quote-unquote Aggie in high school. Went down the path of student government and other activities, and after I graduated from Sanger High, went to UCLA, majored in communications. Was down there that I realized that people were really disconnected and removed from how our food is grown and the agriculture industry and all of the issues that go with that. I decided at that point that I needed to make a change. So I applied for a transfer to UC Davis, where I would have had to double major in ag and communications. And then one day I was looking through the stacks in the library and I came across a catalog. Yes, they were old written catalogs then from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, and they had a major called Ag Communications in the journalism department. And so I applied, got accepted, moved up there, and it was probably the best thing I ever did career-wise. It took this farm kid to get off the farm to want to do something in agriculture. And from then on, I was able to do a lot of different things in ag. I started out as an ag reporter, a little radio station in Bakersfield, and quickly realized that I wanted to tell the story of agriculture as opposed to reporting about it. And there's a difference. And that was kind of more the public relations focus. So I then kind of changed gears and started to go into more working for ag organizations that did focus on telling agriculture story. And my career has been kind of a flip-flop back and forth between being an ag reporter for farm publications and local newspaper and then doing ag public relations. And further on in my career, got focused and kind of centered mostly on water, agriculture water use, and worked for a major water district. And that was a game changer for me, and it was a wonderful opportunity. And now I retired from ag communications in 2010, and since then was farming with my husband. He passed last year, so now I'm farming with my son and son-in-law. And so it went from retirement being back into really working every day on the farm. So it's really been looking back, a fun career.
And I love how you saw this need, this communications void in the ability for the public to really understand how does the food get into the grocery store and how does it get on the table, and the importance of having an appreciation for that and transform, that thought into a beautiful career. And I think still to this day, that's such an amazing focus of the ag communications industry, is just continually trying to educate the public.
It is. It's about education. Everything in public relations, really whatever the subject matter is, it's about education. We need to educate our consumers. Whatever the product is that we represent in public relations, it's all about educating the consumer, providing that good, strong foundation of goodwill. So I always said that's PR's job, provide that goodwill so the marketing team can come in and make the sale. But you have to have the goodwill and the understanding of what the company is, the business, the service, and that's all education. So it's surprising in our major that we're not really encouraged to take education classes, but in some respects that might be helpful down the road.
Absolutely agree. So in addition to your professional career, I know you've also been really involved in organizations, the Women in Agriculture and the FAIR and Public Relations Society of America, to name a few. Do you want to share a little bit about the things that you did in those roles and also why that was important to you?
My mom was the ultimate volunteer, and she always said that life is not a spectator sport. you have to jump in. And the more you put in, the more fun, the more you're going to get out of it. And when I got involved in working for an ag organization, that's when I really started to get involved in other ag organizations and to help educate myself, but also just to feel that maybe there's some other way I can help make a difference. I joined PRSA, our Central California chapter, Public Relations Society of America, when I moved up here to Fresno from Bakersfield and Visalia, and got up here and started working, and at the encouragement of Judy Gannulin. Back then it was called the PR Roundtable, which was the precursor to PRSA. She said, Liz, you need to join. And I did, and was very happy to do that, to meet fellow public relations practitioners who, all of them, you included, have been great mentors and support throughout my career. And I felt that I needed to learn more about the role of public relations, because at Cal Poly it was journalism, but I focused more on broadcast and spent half the time in the radio station, half the time in the ag part of campus. So I was all over that campus, but doing things that were pretty specific to news gathering and the ag part. So I had one public relations class, but I really didn't understand the whys and the wherefores of PR. And that's what I learned through PRSA. And as a result, Judy encouraged me to become accredited. And that's where I really learned the nuts and bolts. And I do strongly recommend anybody seeking a career in public relations to do pursue your accreditation at any stage of your career. It's definitely worth taking the time to pursue that, and you will learn so much, and it will help you with your own credibility with future employers or current employers down the road. It is a great thing to do for you personally, but also professionally.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and you just learn so much.
Yes, you
going
do.
through the APR process.
Yes, you do.
So the idea of women in agriculture has been for many years primarily a male-dominated industry. And of course, now we have more and more women being heavily involved. And so my thought would be that organization would have been a particularly helpful place for camaraderie, similar to what you had mentioned for PRSA. Is that true?
Yes, it was. California Women for Agriculture still has a very viable role in the industry statewide. Central Valley chapter is made up of mostly Fresno and Madera women and men that are members. Our secretary of our chapter organization is a man. So it's really a helpful organization, provides a lot of opportunity networking, and again, the education component. CWA started out where there was a void, I think, from the woman consumer's perspective, and having women in agriculture be able to relate maybe a little better to women consumers at the grocery store level. It was very much well received. I can remember early on in our days, we would spend time in the produce section of grocery stores just answering questions. Depending on whatever the crop was in season, we would bring samples in. If the grocery stores allowed us, Save Mart was wonderful to allow us in for many years doing that. We don't do it anymore. Nobody has time, but that was a great way to do real localized PR one-on-one, but that consumer education was really important, and it still is. And I think doing it on a one-on-one level like that, and women relating to other women, we're all concerned about the foods that we put in our bodies, especially in our children's bodies. So I think, we were better equipped perhaps to answer some questions than someone who had the clinical answers in a lab coat or something. I think it helped the fact that we would say, we're feeding our own kids and grandkids this food. So yeah, it's safe. Don't worry about it.
So PR for water. Water, of course, is so important, right? We cannot understate the value of its importance. However, it's something that most people don't think about, right? They turn on their faucet and the water comes out, so everything's great. So can you talk a little bit about what types of things you did on behalf of the Water District and what that was like?
It was a great opportunity to really specialize, to become educated in specializing in a particular segment of agriculture that is so greatly important. If we didn't have water, we would not be farming, period. End of discussion. You can have the best climate in the world and soils in the world, but if you can't irrigate it and you can't get those crops to grow, you're done. So when an opportunity came for going into the public information office at Westlands Water District back in the early 80s, I jumped at the chance. And it was good. The learning curve was very steep. In hindsight, I wish I had taken a few hydrology courses in college. Listened to my dad a little bit more about what was wrong with the irrigation well and things like that, the actual mechanics of water and water distribution. But I learned over time, and especially learned of how the complex nature of California water is when you have federal projects, state projects, local projects, water rights that date back to the days of the Native Americans and the missions, and pre-1914 water rights, which pretty much are still untouchable in the state, and recent ones. And I mean, it's such a complex yet so important issue to all of us in California, whether you farm or not. With the recent droughts, we've seen how critical it is when we don't have enough water for our communities, especially a lot of the hard-hit rural communities, really suffering with having good quality water, drinkable water, and things that they need for their schools and their medical facilities and just the small communities. It's a huge issue. I think Mark Twain really summed it up best when talking about California water, and he was attributed to saying that whiskey is for drinking, water is for fighting over. And nowhere is that truer in California. You really want to be well armed with good biologists, engineers, and attorneys, because unfortunately that's how decisions are made in California water. So it becomes very complex and very cumbersome, but yet what a challenge as a public relations person to try and explain and to whittle it all down and make sense for the voter. Because that pretty much is where a lot of the decisions in California water have been made and will be made, is at the ballot box, especially with the initiative process in California. There's going to continue, and something, a resource as important as water is to the state. We're always going to have some type of a water-related initiative proposed or on the ballot, or the legislature in Sacramento are going to be making decisions. And the regulatory, the State Water Resource Control Board, and others will be making decisions on how water is allocated, utilized, developed. And there's just a long, long history and probably even a longer future ahead. Because we have 40 million people in this state, and our water infrastructure is not equipped to handle that many people. It's feast or famine, droughts or floods. This year, I mean, look at us, we had 17 inches of rain in the Central Valley alone, which was a blessing. But when you have that much water, what do you do with it? So just a lot of issues. So the more that we can educate people about, for every cause there is an effect. So if you go down this path on how to answer this particular issue, here's what could be at stake, or here's what could be affected by going down that path as opposed to going down this path. And it gets very emotional because, you know, you talk to any farmer and you can take anything from him, probably including his wife, but don't you take his water. And there's been histories on the Kings River of guys standing with shovels, duking it out on the banks of the Kings River in the early days of diverting water off that river for their field. So there's just such a passion in agriculture, but also on environmental side of the equation. All of the major stakeholders are very passionate about water, as well we all should be. And so that passion brings in a whole different way to try to educate too. Because much like what we see today in society, you have sides that are very entrenched, and unfortunately it gets to the point where don't confuse me with the facts, my mind is made up. So how do you go about trying to overcome those obstacles? And like most of PR, at least should be, is starting with kind of a benchmark. What is it that you want people to know, to come away from? What do they currently know? And what are some strategies and tools you're going to use to help move that gauge? Mm-hmm. To move them to better understanding, or to come along and support your position on this particular ballot measure or issue that's before the state Senate or Assembly. So it's a big job. It's gotten harder, I think, today because of social media is good and bad in that everybody's an expert, whether it's factual or not. It's their opinion. It's out there. It gets legs. And then if you're working for an agency or an organization or representing an organization that you're driven by facts, trying to get the facts out there after their minds are made up is very difficult. Huge challenges today. Mm-hmm. It was challenging back when I was in the thick of it too. When I was at Westlands, we had 60 Minutes come out, and that was interesting, for lack of a better word. I was greatly disappointed because I was an avid watcher of 60 Minutes, but after I saw how they approach an issue and went about it, it kind of, at that point, and this was in 84, 85, maybe 86, somewhere around there, I think it was really the start of advocacy journalism. and they had a position that they wanted to promote on an issue pertaining to irrigation, drainage, water management, and it became a hot button issue, and that's one of the issues why I got hired on at Westlands. They needed another public information person there, and so that's how I got hired on, and it was a tough issue. But just watching how they put things together, and the interesting thing was the other public information officer, I was his assistant, we worked very closely with our general manager, who was excellent. And we did a lot of pre-interviews with him, and he did a stellar job even when Ed Bradley came in and they rearranged the furniture and brought in big cameras and chased everybody out, and a few of us were allowed to sit in there, and here's the big bright lights, and our general manager did an exceptional job. And he was unflappable, which was not easy to do. The questions were stinging, difficult, gotcha, all of the typical 60 Minutes things. And they ended up not using his segment at all in the segment that they did on the drainage issue. And that alone, we all thought was a win, because the drainage water that was causing contamination with wildfowl in a drainage pond up in Merced County, that was the big brunt of the issue, was this drainage water coming off these farms from Westlands Water District were causing wildfowl deformities and deaths because it was allowed to concentrate at high levels, and the element was selenium. Anyways, he did a stellar job, and they did not use him because they really couldn't get him in any gotcha moments. And that really opened my eyes to being a little leery in the future when network news would call. I learned to ask a lot of questions when reporters would call. What is it you're looking for? Who else are you interviewing on this subject? What direction are you wanting to take this story? Wasn't used to be just reporting on this particular issue. I learned to ask questions. Most of the time they wouldn't share it, but you found other ways of doing your homework and figuring it out. But it was a real eye-opening experience. And the guard goes up, in dealing with some of the media back then. And I think that's very apparent today, too, unfortunately.
Let's talk about an early win. Share something that you particularly enjoyed or were proud of early in your career.
Wow. I would guess early on, I was working for the Tulare County Farm Bureau, and the annual banquet was coming up, and they were able to secure the Secretary of Agriculture at the time, John Block, and he came out, and we had arranged a news conference for him. I worked with his staff out of D.C. and his public information staff on that, and because he was a member of the cabinet, it was a big deal. It was a big deal. And it was good. And interestingly enough, it was during the time of going back when California had an outbreak of the Mediterranean fruit fly. And that was a big issue back then. Do we spray? Do we not spray? I mean, this is California. People don't want to be sprayed. How are we going to control this pest? It's a major outbreak for California and the nation. And anyway, so it was really a good introductory opportunity for me because I came there straight out of radio. So it really opened my eyes to now I'm not in the reporter mode, I'm in the public relations mode. And this is how, we want to put him in a favorable position and put the organization clearly in a favorable position and not have it sidetracked by the medfly issue that was out there and some of the other things. But that was really a great first opportunity. And then I would say later on in my career, another opportunity of working with major network media was with NBC, and they had a Fleecing of America segment that they wanted to do on federal water projects. Their premise was that the federal government investing in these water projects in the arid West, the taxpayers pick up the interest component of the funding of those projects, that the water users pay for the hard capital cost, but the taxpayer, the federal government, picks up the interest component. They wanted to make that quote-unquote subsidy a bad thing. And when they first called, they didn't say that it was for this segment. They didn't say what it was for. They wanted to just come out and do an interview with our general manager and some farmers and talk about farming in Westlands Water District and the federal water project and stuff. And we got on the phone with, the Bureau of Reclamation and other federal water districts and asked them, hey, did you get a call from NBC News, a nightly news? Yeah. What do you think? And we kind of did homework, started watching NBC News for a while, and they did have a segment on the Fleecing of America. So we kind of did a little more bird dogging on that and ended up, yep, that's what they wanted to do. And so we just got conference calls together and really kind of tried to do message management to the extent you can with a bunch of independent thinking water districts and farmers, but we did our best. And we decided that the word subsidy was not something that was going to do us any favors, that really this is an investment the federal government made, and the investment cost is what's picked up by the federal government, i.e. the taxpayers, and that these water projects clearly have benefited the arid West. And there would be nothing in these states today were it not for having those projects here. So again, it was a big to-do. They came out, they interviewed a lot of people up and down the state and the valley, and then we watched with bated breath to see what would come off, and they ended up never doing a segment on fleecing of America using federal water projects. So the fact that it never aired was probably one of my biggest successes in public relations. And I think that's what's interesting about our industry is, you say, oh, public relations mean publicity. And it's like, nah, there's a whole lot more to it. And if you can keep that publicity at bay when it's not going to be, that it's not going to be good, if you can put it off and keep it at bay and not even let it see the surface, then you have done well. And nobody will never know about it. That's okay. That's kind of cool. That's kind of cool, really. So I would guess those two things are the things that stand out in my mind the many years that I was doing ag PR, ag communications.
I think the first time as a practitioner you deal with an advance team for an elected official or a celebrity or something, that really is an interesting indoctrination because it's just a whole different world.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of fun. I really appreciate you articulating that, sometimes the non-story is actually a bigger win. So that was a neat thing too. So how did things change from the start of your career to your retirement? Obviously, the more things change, the more they stay the same. So we'll talk about that too, how things stayed the same. But maybe share a little bit about how things changed for you on a day-to-day basis, on a philosophical basis. How are things different when you retired than at the beginning?
Oh, wow. Night and day. When I started at the radio station, it was 8-track carts that we used to get our sound bites. You would use tape recorders, actual cassette tapes, come back to the station, burn the interview on a cart. We had old standard typewriters, the old black things. I don't even remember the brand of them, but not electric, manual typewriters, boom, 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 pound out our story on, looked like newsprint, and made sure it had the cart, run it in. You'd give the cart to the guy who was running the boards, and you'd come in, do your 5-minute news break, whatever, and then you threw your copy back in the bin where the next reporter doing the next one could pull it if they wanted, and they would redo that or rewrote the lead so it didn't sound like the same story. I mean, that, and then you look at the technology today in the radio industry, it's unbelievable. But when I left and made the move to public relations, I felt really cool because I graduated to an IBM Selectric typewriter. Oh, wow. An electric typewriter with the automatic correct. The little X that you hit and it whited out your typo and then you can move forward. That was incredible. So I was happy with that. But this was before fax machines. This was before cell phones. This was before a lot of things. So when it was time to put your monthly newspaper together, it was a lot of work. There was a lot of work. You had to write your stories, and then you would take them physically, the hard copy, take them to the print shop that would enter them on a typesetter machine, and then they would do the layout. And it was a long process. And you look at it, and now all of that's done on your computer. Heck, they can even do it on their phone. So the technology's just been incredible. When I went to Westlands, they got a fax machine. So it was like, woohoo. And when we did news releases, we wanted that information to get out before they would mail it. And here it takes 3 or 4 days, So my boss, who was a former radio guy, he said, let's just deliver them. And so back then it was, channel 47, 24, 30, 26, the Fresno B, KMJ, maybe KMA, K-Free. That was it. Just get in the car, boom, run around Fresno, drop off the news releases. The newsrooms loved it because this was right now, and they used it because of that. And you got to develop that rapport with the assignment editors because you see them every once in a while. You do a news release. Oh, you got a news release for us? Because most everybody would mail them. And then we got the fax machine. It was like, woohoo. And now it's all email or instantly. So the technology alone has really, really changed how we communicate. I mean, we see that in everything. So I would say that that's probably the biggest change in my career, was just seeing how the technology gave us the tools to make things easier, in the sense that it made getting the information out faster. On how you approach issues, I don't know if that really has changed much, because to really be an effective communicator, you still have to do your homework. You still have to know what your audience is thinking. And that comes with doing your research. You still have to know where a voting public or consumer base is in their decisions on voting or purchasing items or whatever. You still have to have that background information, the numbers, the data, to give you a starting point, so then you can judge how effective you've been in your program when you can do a follow-up survey or a follow-up matrix that you can see if you did move that needle. I don't think that hasn't changed too much. I don't know if it should, because I think an effective program still is rooted in knowing your audience and knowing where they are and what triggers them, and how you can then package your product, your message, your issue, so it is something that they can relate to, or you want them to relate to. I don't think that's changed too much. I think what's changed too is I think we see much more advocacy journalism that I would really want to see. I really would like to go back to where it's just fact-based reporting. And I think most of our local media still very much does that, but they're striving for ratings too. And it's all about, can you create some buzz? And honestly, where do people get their news? Maybe not the local media as much as they do social. That's probably more where people get it. They don't turn on channel 30, 24, 47. Old people like me do. But the young ones, they're not watching the evening news. So I think in that regard, there's just a whole big area that PR practitioners today have to be knowledgeable about. Back when I was doing it, we didn't have to. We didn't have that moving target, the dynamic of social media and the role it plays in forming opinions and practices of consumers.
So another component that hopefully hasn't changed is the idea of ethics. And I know that you are, like all of us, have very passionate feelings about how important ethics is in the public relations industry. And I'm wondering if maybe you could share a little bit about why you feel that way, why you feel it's so important, and how ethics has played a really important role in your career.
You know, I think there's no question that your reputation is critical to your profession, but your reputation is also critical to your character, your personal character and integrity, and how you conduct yourself as an individual. And I think sometimes people separate that out, and there's things they wouldn't dream of doing as an individual, but when their boss says, you know, maybe we should do this, and they'll go, yeah, maybe we should. And I've always said it's so important not to compromise yourself for a paycheck, because every morning we get up and we look ourselves in the mirror, and you have to be able to feel good about what's looking back at you. And your reputation will follow you, especially in a town like Fresno. Even though it's a big city, it still is a small town in a lot of respects when it comes to our public relations industry. And I think if you've always been one that's a straight shooter, tell the story, do your best, don't compromise, don't lie, tell the truth, be factual. I mean, you're just all the things that are important to you as an individual, and you do it for the right reasons professionally, you're going to succeed. You're going to succeed. And that was really rung home to me when I left Westlands in 2000, which seems like just yesterday in some respects. The board made a decision to go down a path that me as a public relations person didn't agree with professionally and or personally. So I had a choice to make. Am I going to stay and promote something that I honestly feel is not right and harmful to agriculture industry as a whole? Or am I going to say, I'll try to spin this as, I hate that word spin, but in this case it would have been having to spin it, some ugly news as best as possible. And I opted not to. And the general manager at the time, who did not agree with it either, he and I both left. And unfortunately, that became news, and the Fresno Bee put it on the front page. And that was like, oh man, no, it's not about us. You know, it's not about us. But I guess people really didn't do things like that. And so it became news for a quick blurb, and then I was gone. But I got some emails from some reporters that I had worked with over the years that they were some of the hardest reporters. They were the most critical of Westlands. They were solid, good reporters, but they would always use those adjectives that just, would make the PR back of our necks crawl, And it was like, oh, please, did you have to use that word? But they were tough. They were tough. And I got some of the most endearing and genuine emails from them saying, I'm not surprised that you're leaving because of your integrity. I'm not surprised. And it just was like, whoa, I did not expect that. So people do look at other people when you do things for the right reason, even though it is a difficult decision to make. And we were farming, my husband and I, we always farmed, and I've always had an outside job, which is kind of what we would live on. And I knew it was going to create hardships for us financially, but we made it work. But it was just something I had to do. And it was the right thing to do. It was the absolute right thing to do in looking back. So any of the PR practitioners that are wrestling, and we all will at some point in our life, something that we have to promote, defend, or try to move the needle on issue management, it's tough. But if it puts you in a position personally where you think could negatively affect your reputation or brings you conflict in your character and integrity, then by all means, don't hesitate for a minute. Don't compromise yourself for a paycheck. And honestly, your own faith and spirituality plays into it, God's got your back. He'll take care of you. And that was the case. But from a career-wise move, it was probably one of the best things I ever did.
And that was going to be a few of my follow-ups. And thank you very much for sharing that story. I was hopeful you would share that with us. I remember that moment very clearly. It was right when I started teaching. And, I remember picking up the Fresno Bee and going, oh my goodness, my friend Liz left her job and it's on the front page of the paper. And I had you come in and talk to the class, as you may recall. And it was such an important lesson for them. And it was so wonderful for you to be willing to share that with them and share the notes of encouragement that you had received. And it was such a valuable lesson for them that not only was it a difficult decision, but it was the right decision. And you did what was right. And your career had never been in a more strong position than it was that day. Right? And I think that's just so critical. And obviously these days, those are not the type of things that are on the front page of the paper, but it was a really fun moment for the PR industry here in the Valley.
Well, and I thank you for helping me, talking me off the ledge. And there were other PR practitioners too. And I was kind of like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And you guys all help provide clarity for me to be able to come to a decision and to make it. Yeah, there was a lot of things. I went off the record with a very good reporter who had covered our beat that I felt very comfortable in doing on that one. And he was very gracious, and he definitely respected me going off the record, because I would never go off the record with a reporter, but with Mark I did. And he was just really, really helpful in that. He goes, you're doing the right thing. You're doing the right thing. And I said, well, don't make it about me, please, please, please. And the sad thing was that he was on vacation at that time and he wasn't able to cover it. But the reporter that they did have cover it was a good dude too, an old reporter, and had his own set of ethics too and how he approached reporting. So that made it very helpful. And that's the one hard thing with ethics today is, you could be probably the most ethical person in your office, but we're surrounded by people around us that we have to work with and or report to, or reporters or others that don't share that same ethics. And that's the challenge today. How can we continue to maintain our own integrity and character and doing the right thing and use it as a way to help show them that this is the way it needs to be done? And trust me, it's going to work out. When you do things for the right reason, it always works out. Mm-hmm. But getting people to embrace that when this kind of, really harsh world we live in now, it's a struggle. It's a struggle. And that's, I think, why I'm so glad PRSA continues to focus on ethics, the code of ethics. And, I got an email the other day that just was talking about the code of ethics from PRSA National. And it was like, yes, thank you. I'm glad we're still focusing on this because it is so needed today, perhaps more so now.
Mm-hmm. And I love the We all love our PRSA code of ethics, but what's nice is it really articulates very clearly what it means to be an ethical practitioner in very practical terms and provides a blueprint for our young practitioners and our seasoned practitioners. And I think that's one of the reasons why associations are so important, right? To sort of lay that foundation and create those benchmarks, and then also to provide those roadmaps. And that way, no matter what experiences folks have coming into the job, we can all agree that this is what we need to do to be ethical in this space. So I think that, again, education, as we've been discussing, makes that so much easier. You know where the line is, which is important. So speaking of the future of the profession, what advice do you have for folks who are considering this as a career path? What would you tell them to inspire them and also to make sure that they pay attention to certain things?
I would say that now more than ever, organizations, businesses, companies, products need to have good public relations people on their staff, because there is so much misinformation that is out there that needs to be corrected immediately, that needs to be just put away somewhere. Just put it away. And use people who know the science, if you will, behind the role of public relations and the foundation building tool that is so critical in public relations. You can't dismiss it. And yet, unfortunately, when times are lean financially, the marketing, public relations really gets cut, and that's the last place you need to cut. But everything's bottom line driven, and so obviously that's going to continue to happen. I would urge young people coming out of college with their communications, PR degrees, don't give up. Continue to apply. Look for the opportunities that are out there. Volunteer. If the only paying job you can get right now is working at some other field, some other area, something totally different, then go ahead and volunteer. Look for your PRSA chapters or volunteer in an organization and say, I'm going to handle your public relations for that organization for this event or whatever. Volunteer. Get your name out there. You're still keeping a foot in the industry, even though your income is coming from another area, but you still have a foot in it. And that networking is still so critical. And wherever you graduate from, use your alumni. Use your alumni. They're a great resource for securing job leads and following up and helping you. And I would also say, if you have a passion for a particular area, if it's, like healthcare or education or agriculture or forestry management or whatever, food industry, fashion, whatever, don't hesitate to specialize. Don't hesitate to specialize and learn everything you can about that particular industry. If that's a passion for you and where you want to spend your public relations career, don't hesitate to specialize. When I was coming out of school, it was like, oh, don't specialize in anything. You want to be able to make yourself employable to anything and everything. And, a good writer can learn about anything. They can write about anything. There's nothing critical about learning to write well and speak well. So get those good skills under your belt. But if you do want to specialize in a particular area, and if it's environmental or agriculture, take all the courses you can, volunteer in the organizations that are passionate for you, and somebody will notice. Somebody will notice. There'll be opportunities open up.
Thank you. Anything else that you would like to add for our wonderful listeners?
I would say that I look back, and when I retired from Farm Bureau in 2010, I go, man, for the last several years, I haven't really done anything as far as public relations goes. But we have our little roadside fruit stand, and that's always been a passion of mine. And we're part of the Fresno County Fruit Trail, and they have a really good program where it brings in people from all over the state to come in during the Blossom Trail in the spring and the Fruit Trail, come and eat the eye candy that you see, in the spring. And I have to say that my PR these days is kind of more one-on-one with the customers and the people that come in. And I find I still use a lot of those same skills in communicating with our customers. We had one customer come in from the Bay Area, and she was dead serious when she asked, do you have to plant the peach trees every year to get a crop? Or how does that work? And, I could have just said, oh my God, and laugh, try not to laugh or have this shock expression on my face. But no, I took a deep breath and explained that, no, these are permanent crops and we have to plant them and wait 3 years before we get a peach. and it's just like, oh my gosh. So there's a lot of people that are very, very far removed from how their food is grown, where they grow, and the need is still there. And so on a kind of a more one-on-one basis, I feel like I'm contributing in a very small way to doing that, but it is fun. And through the California Farm Water Coalition this summer, we had some food bloggers and social influencers come in and spent some time with them. And that was fun. And they had some excellent questions and were able to talk about water, able to talk about farming, some of the issues that are, driving why we do what we do these days. So I still feel like even though I'm not actually doing public relations, I'm still utilizing a lot of the tools that I've had through the years and just farming and selling our peaches, plums, and nectarines on the side of the road.
And jam.
And jams, yes, and jams.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you, Liz. Well, we have been visiting today with Liz Hudson, and we're so grateful for your time today and your wisdom and the stories and just the inspiration. So thank you very much, Liz.
Thank you, Betsy, and thank you for the opportunity to do this, and thank you for what you're doing to help shape our industry for a very strong future by working with the students.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Central Valley Stories, Advertising and Public Relations. Join us again next time as we talk history, trends, changes, and challenges with more of the region's veteran practitioners and agency owners. Until then, take care and be well.